The flight that changed everything. The harsh, unyielding voice of the flight attendant cracked through the murmur of the passengers as she looked up from her seat. "You need to leave now." The words were simple but full of weight. Every pair of eyes in the cabin turned to her in an instant. She was confused, disoriented, and the plane was already taxiing down the runway. Was this a joke? Was she supposed to laugh? Her fingers trembled as she gripped the armrest, her heart racing. She glanced out of the window. The plane was moving, gaining speed, and the next thing she knew, the attendants were standing over her. The words felt like a slap. There was no explanation, no apology, nothing but the heavy pressure of the eyes on her, as if she were the one who'd committed the crime. "But I paid for this ticket," she stammered, looking around at the shocked faces of those who had been strangers just moments before. They were all still, their gazes a mix of pity and confusion, none of them stepping forward, none of them willing to speak up. The attendant wasn't looking at her anymore. He was speaking into a small earpiece. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, unable to grasp what was happening. Every beat of her heart was like a drum inside her chest. "I'm not going anywhere." Her mind was racing, every scenario flashing before her. A simple misunderstanding, a mistake. They'd realized they were wrong, and everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. The attendant's face hardened, his voice unwavering as he spoke in low, clipped tones to someone she couldn't see. "We've been instructed to remove her from the flight," he said coldly. "Now." He didn't even hesitate. He gestured to another attendant who stood silently by the door. She gave a nod and moved toward her. The sense of disbelief surged again, like a wave crashing against her chest. How could this be happening? "Please, wait," she said, her voice strained as she stood up, her legs shaking beneath her. "What did I do? Why am I being removed from the flight?" The attendants exchanged a glance, the look in their eyes unreadable. No one spoke. She could feel the coldness in the air, as if everything about this moment had been planned, engineered in some way that she couldn't understand. As she was escorted toward the plane's exit, the stares of the other passengers felt like ice, needles against her skin. They didn't speak, didn't protest, just watched her leave. She didn't even know if she was angry or confused anymore. The door opened. The cold wind hit her face immediately, the rush of it like a slap in the face. She blinked, trying to adjust to the sudden shift, and there, on the tarmac, was a man, in a sharp suit. He had an aura of authority that made her instinctively pause. He wasn't alone. A few other people stood behind him, all dressed in dark clothing, their faces stoic, unreadable. "Ma'am, please come with us," the man in the suit said, his voice steady, commanding. He didn't explain who he was or why he was there. His presence alone seemed to demand obedience. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't have time to process what was happening. She followed him, step by step, her shoes crunching against the pavement. The airport was large, and the distance from the plane to wherever they were headed felt endless. Her mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything. Why had they kicked her off the plane? Was it an error, a misunderstanding? What did they think she had done? She had paid for her ticket, followed the rules, and yet here she was, being led like a criminal by a man in a suit. They entered a small, sterile office tucked away from the rest of the airport. The door clicked shut behind her, and the man gestured for her to sit. He didn't sit. He stood, his gaze fixed on her. "Please, take a seat," he repeated, more gently this time. She sat down slowly, her body still tense, on edge. She couldn't stop looking at him, trying to find any sign of what was going on. He studied her for a moment before speaking again. "I know this must seem very strange to you, but I assure you it is necessary." His words felt cold and rehearsed. "You're not being punished. You're being ... chosen." "Chosen," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Her hands were clenched tight in her lap, and her mind was in overdrive. What was he talking about? The man nodded, his face impassive. He didn't break eye contact. "You have a ... unique position with this airline." Her confusion deepened. What was he trying to say? She had no connection to any airline, let alone this one. He took a step forward and handed her a sheet of paper. The seal on the top was unmistakable. The airline's logo. She glanced at it briefly before looking back up at him, her heart skipping a beat. "You're the new owner," he said, his voice quiet, but somehow firm. The room felt like it had just spun around her. She couldn't breathe. Her pulse hammered in her ears, and for a moment, everything was silent. It was as if her body had forgotten how to function. She blinked at the paper, her eyes frantically scanning the words, trying to make sense of them. This was a mistake. There was no way this was real. The man didn't wait for her response. Yes, I'm sure you're confused, but it's true. You've inherited this airline. You own it now. Her head was spinning. The world felt like it was unraveling, and she had no grasp on reality anymore. She didn't even know what to say. The words he was speaking didn't fit into her mind. They didn't belong in her world. You have the power to make decisions, he continued, to take control. How? Why? I don't understand, she stammered. Her voice felt hollow, like it wasn't her own. She looked down at the paper again, the words swimming before her eyes. You'll find out, he said, his voice almost too calm. You have all the tools you need. All you need to do now is take control. Her fingers traced the seal on the paper, but her thoughts were still running wild. How could this be real? How could this be happening? Just minutes ago, she had been sitting on a plane, a regular passenger, just like everyone else. Now, she was being told that she owned an airline. The weight of the paper in her hands felt like it was crushing her, pressing her into the seat. The man looked at her one last time. Your journey starts now. Her hands were shaking, and she didn't know what was coming next. But she knew one thing for sure. Her life had just changed forever. The weight of the world. She sat there, frozen in time, unable to wrap her mind around the words that had just been spoken. The man's voice still echoed in her ears. You're the new owner. But what did that even mean? She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared for any of this. She glanced at the paper again, her fingers still trembling, as if touching it might make the entire situation more real. But it didn't. It only made her feel more disconnected, like she was in some kind of strange dream she couldn't wake up from. You're the new owner, the man had said, his face as unreadable as ever. He didn't smile, didn't offer any reassurance, just cold, factual words. But ownership of an airline, it didn't make sense. How could a stranger be handed something so vast, so powerful, without any warning, without any explanation? I don't understand, she finally managed to say, her voice hoarse. I don't. This is impossible. There must be some mistake. The man didn't respond right away. He just stood there, watching her with a look that seemed both patient and knowing. She wasn't sure if it was the silence or the weight of his gaze, but it made her feel even more exposed than she already did. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she was still processing everything, still trapped in that moment where her reality and the impossible collided. You don't have to understand everything right now, he said after a long pause, but you have power now. The decisions you make will have consequences, not just for the airline, but for a lot of people. The words hung in the air like a dense fog, clouding her thoughts further. Power, people. She barely understood how she had gone from being a regular passenger to the owner of an entire airline, let alone the responsibilities that came with it. She stood up abruptly, feeling the urgency in her chest, an uncontrollable urge to escape, to run from the madness of it all. She needed time, space, anything to process this. But the man in the suit was quick to stop her. Please sit down, he said calmly. You're not going anywhere until you understand the full picture. Something about his voice made her sit back down, against her will. It wasn't fear. It was something else, a sense of authority so potent that it paralyzed her into submission. She hated the feeling, but couldn't escape it. Tell me everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mind was racing, and her heart felt like it was about to break through her chest. I don't understand. How could this happen? Why me? He walked to the desk and placed a small silver briefcase on top of it. He didn't open it, just let it sit there. His eyes locked onto hers as he spoke. The airline you now own is part of a very specific business structure, one that doesn't just involve money. This isn't just about flying planes. It's about influence, connections, power. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You've been chosen because of your lineage, your history. Your connection to this company runs deeper than you realize. Her stomach twisted. Her history. What history was he talking about? She wasn't anyone special. She didn't come from money, didn't have any notable family members. Her life had been simple, ordinary, until now. Until this impossible moment. I don't understand, she repeated, her mind struggling to grasp his meaning. The airline's ownership isn't as it seems on the surface, he continued. There are strings tied to people, places, and events that you've never known about, but you're going to learn about them, whether you want to or not. The words hung in the air, like a chilling promise. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to shout, to demand that this nightmare be over. But something about his tone, the way he said, whether you want to or not, made her realize that there was no escape. This was happening. She couldn't change it. You're going to need help, he said, his voice softening just slightly. You'll meet people who will guide you, people who have been part of this world for much longer than you, but you must trust them. Trust is the only way to survive this. Survive, she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. Why would I need to survive this? It's just an airline. Why does it matter? The man's eyes darkened. Because this airline is much more than a business. It's a weapon. It's a tool that has been used for years to shape the world in ways you cannot even imagine. Her breath caught in her throat. A weapon, a tool. What was he talking about? You're not just the owner of a company, he said, his voice low, as if confiding in her a secret too dangerous for others to know. You've inherited control over something far more dangerous than you realize. There are people who will do anything to take that control from you. Her body stiffened at his words, a cold chill running down her spine. She wanted to ask more questions, to scream at him for answers, but the reality of the situation was beginning to hit her. She was being thrust into a world she didn't understand, a world that could very well destroy her if she wasn't careful. He stood up suddenly, breaking the silence. There's someone I need you to meet. They'll explain more. She didn't have time to process his words before another man walked into the room. Unlike the first man, this one was older, his face wrinkled with experience, his expression hard as stone. This is Mr. Gray, the man in the suit said, introducing them. He's been working with the company for a long time. He'll be your guide from now on. Mr. Gray nodded curtly. I'll take it from here, he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. You're in danger, and the sooner you understand that, the better. She wanted to say something, anything to express her confusion, her frustration, her disbelief, but the weight of the situation was settling over her like a heavy cloak, suffocating her words before they could escape. Mr. Gray turned to the desk and opened the briefcase. Inside there were stacks of papers, documents, contracts, names. He flipped through them quickly, his fingers moving with practiced precision. This is your new reality, he said, his voice colder now. You'll need to read every single one of these. She stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. But why? Why me? Mr. Gray's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd arrived in this surreal world, she saw a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. Because, he said slowly, you're the only one left who can stop it from all falling apart. The only one who can stop them from taking it from you. Unraveling the truths, she sat back in the chair, staring at the pile of documents before her. The weight of everything pressing down on her felt suffocating. The words on the pages seemed foreign, like a language she couldn't understand. Every page was another step further into a world she never asked to enter. But here she was, stuck, in the middle of it. No way out. Mr. Gray stood at the window, his back to her as he looked out at the vast expanse of the airport, a silent sentinel keeping watch. The air was thick with the tension of the moment, and for a while neither of them spoke. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the silence almost unbearable as the reality of the situation settled deeper. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she'd had with the man in the suit. He had said she had inherited this airline, no, not just an airline, but a tool, a weapon, something that had been in the shadows for years, used by people who wielded power in ways she couldn't comprehend. But why her? What made her so special? She was just an ordinary woman, no special family lineage, no connections. She had worked a regular job, lived a regular life. But now everything was falling apart, and she was expected to pick up the pieces. Why am I here? She finally asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. What do you want from me? Mr. Gray turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. There was something in his gaze that sent a chill down her spine, a coldness that suggested he knew much more than he was letting on. He had been in this world far longer than she could even begin to imagine. It's not about what I want from you, he said, his voice low and deliberate. It's about what they want. The people who have been pulling the strings for years. The ones who think they can control everything, everyone. She didn't know who he was talking about, but the dread that filled her chest told her it wasn't good. Who are they? Who are these people? Mr. Gray didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the briefcase and pulled out another document. He held it out to her, his fingers resting lightly on the edges, as if he was afraid of what it might do. She took it hesitantly, her hands shaking as she unfolded the paper. It was a list of names, and not just any names. These were powerful people, corporate moguls, politicians' names that would mean nothing to her in her old life. But now, staring at them, they felt like the names of ghosts. Ghosts who had been haunting her for far longer than she could possibly know. Every name on this list is tied to the airline, Mr. Gray continued. They are the ones who control everything. They think they can use the airline to push their agendas, to manipulate the system. But that stops now. Because now, you're the one in charge. Her breath caught in her throat. What are you saying? I don't know how to run an airline. I don't know how to deal with ... them. Mr. Gray's expression softened, but only slightly. You don't have to know everything. Not right away. You just have to make the right choices, the right decisions. And you'll have help. People who will guide you. But first, you have to understand what's at stake. Her mind was racing, but something inside her told her she couldn't back down now. She had been thrust into this role, whether she wanted it or not, and if she didn't take control, someone else would. She didn't know if she was ready for this, but she knew she couldn't afford to back out now. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice steadying. Mr. Gray nodded. First, we need to find out who we can trust, who's really on our side. Because, believe me, not everyone will be. You're going to make enemies, and you'll need to be prepared for that. You'll need to make some tough choices. But at the end of the day, you'll have to decide if you want to keep your hands clean or get your hands dirty to protect what's yours. She swallowed hard. The weight of his words was heavier than anything she had imagined. Her hands, still trembling, pressed against the edges of the desk as she tried to steady herself. Could she really do this? Could she lead this company? Could she fight the people who had spent years building this empire in the shadows? You'll need to understand the bigger picture, Mr. Gray continued. This isn't just about the airline. This is about power, about control. You've stepped into a world that's been carefully crafted, and now it's all in your hands. She nodded, though the fear in her chest hadn't dissipated. In fact, it was only growing. She had so many questions, too many to count. But there was one question that stuck out more than the others. What do they want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why me? Why now? Mr. Gray stepped closer to her, his face unreadable. He didn't answer immediately, letting the silence stretch between them. And then, finally, he spoke. They've been watching you. For a long time, he said. They've been waiting for the right moment. And now, you're the key to everything. They want you to fall in line, to do what they want. But you don't have to. You can fight back. Her heart skipped a beat. What happens if I don't? If you don't, Mr. Gray said, his voice cold and final, everything you've ever known will be destroyed. The people you love will be in danger. And this airline, it will be theirs. But if you fight back, if you take control, you have a chance to make everything right. She didn't know what she was getting into, but she also didn't have much of a choice. Her life had already changed beyond recognition. She had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went, but she was about to find out. Mr. Gray handed her a small key. This will unlock the safe in your office. Everything you need to know is inside. She took it, her hand steady now, and nodded. There was no going back. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but she was ready to fight. To take control, whatever it took. You'll have your first test soon, Mr. Gray said, turning toward the door. Be prepared, and don't trust anyone to isolate. She stood up, her heart racing, and as he left, she knew that her life was about to get even more complicated. The shadows were closing in, and she was right in the middle of it all. Into the abyss she stood in front of the office door, staring at the small key in her hand. It felt heavier than it should have felt. A cold realization washed over her. She was about to step into a world she could not control but had no choice but to learn how to navigate. The key seemed like the only thing she could hold on to, as if it were the one thing keeping her tethered to some kind of reality. But she was beginning to realize that nothing about her reality was normal anymore. Nothing about her life was the same, and nothing would ever be the same again. She turned the key in the lock, and opened the door. The room was small, but it felt vast. It was filled with papers, computers, and several large filing cabinets. The desk was neat and organized, almost too organized, as if it was waiting for her to sit down and take charge. She walked over to the desk and sat in the chair. For the first time since all of this began, she felt the weight of her situation crash down on her. She was not a businesswoman. She didn't know anything about airlines or high-level corporate deals, and yet, here she was being thrust into the heart of it, being told that everything she did from this moment forward would impact thousands of lives. The desk had several folders neatly stacked on one side. She opened the first one. It was full of documents, contracts and names. All of it was foreign to her, and yet it felt like the beginning of a journey she was never prepared for. As she flipped through the pages, she began to see the connections, names she didn't recognize, but the more she looked, the more she saw the patterns, the relationships, the power structures, and at the center of it all was her now. She was part of it now. She was in charge. Whether she wanted to be or not, she reached for the second folder, and as soon as she opened it, a piece of paper fell out and landed on the desk. It was an email, and at the top it said urgent. It was addressed to her name, and it was from someone called the board. The email was brief and to the point. It said that she was expected at a meeting in 1 hour, and she was to bring her best judgment with her. She had no idea who the board was or what they wanted from her, but she knew one thing: they weren't asking, they were telling, and that was not a position she had ever been in before. She had always been the one who asked the questions, not the one who had to answer them. The time was ticking down, and she knew that she had no choice but to go to the meeting. She needed to know who these people were, what they wanted from her, and why they had chosen her for this position. She stood up and walked toward the door, taking a deep breath. Before stepping out into the hall, the building was quiet. Now most of the employees had left for the day, but she could still feel the presence of the people who had been watching her, the weight of their gaze pressing down on her as she made her way to the meeting room. When she reached the door, she hesitated for a moment. Should she turn around and leave? Should she ignore it all and walk away? But then she remembered the last words Mr. Gray had said to her: if you don't take control, they will take everything from you. And something inside her clicked into place. She was not going to back down. She was not going to let these people control her life. She opened the door and stepped inside. The room was large and sleek, the kind of room where decisions were made that could change the world. There were people sitting at the table, but they weren't looking at her. They were looking at the papers in front of them, each one focused on their work, as if she wasn't even there at first. She thought they hadn't seen her, but then one of them looked up, their eyes sharp and calculating. He was the first to speak. Ms. Johnson, he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. We've been waiting for you. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, taking in the room, taking in the people who sat at the table. She had no idea who they were, but their presence was undeniable. They exuded power and control, like they had been at the top of the corporate world for years, without ever being questioned, and now they expected her to fit in with them, to play their game. But she didn't want to play. She didn't want to be a part of their world. She just wanted to find out why they had chosen her and what they wanted from her. We need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Another voice spoke from the opposite side of the table. It was a woman, her tone cold but not unkind. You now control the airline and all that comes with it. You will have to make decisions that affect millions of people, and you will have to do it with authority. We are here to help you, but you must know that there is no turning back from this. There is no going back to your old life. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to keep calm. She had to focus. She had to get through this meeting without showing weakness, without showing fear. Why me? She asked the question that had been haunting her since she first set foot in this world. Why was I chosen for this role? The room was silent for a moment before the man who had spoken earlier leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Because you're the only one who can see through the lies, he said. You're the one who can fix what's been broken. You're the one who can bring balance back to the system. She felt a wave of confusion wash over her. What did he mean by balance? What was broken? She was just an ordinary woman who had been caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. She didn't have the answers. She didn't even know if she had the strength to do what they were asking her to do. Balance. The woman across the table repeated. This company has been through a lot over the years. There have been power struggles, corruption, betrayal. We've tried to keep it together, but the cracks are showing, and if we don't act soon, everything could fall apart. You have the potential to fix that. You have the ability to lead this company out of the darkness. The words felt like a weight in her chest. They were asking her to fix something they had created. They were asking her to clean up their mess, and in return they would give her control. But what did control even mean in a world like this? What did it mean to be in charge of something this vast, something this corrupt? She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them that she wasn't ready, that she didn't have what it took, but she knew that she couldn't. They were right about one thing. If she didn't take control now, if she didn't stand up and make a choice, they would take everything from her, and she couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let it. You'll need to make a choice, the man said, leaning back in his chair. The decisions you make will shape the future of this company and the world beyond it. You have the power now. All you need to do is take it. She looked around the room at the faces staring back at her, each one waiting for her to make her move, waiting for her to decide what would happen next. She knew what they wanted. They wanted her to play their game, to follow their rules, but something inside her told her that if she did that, she would lose herself. She would lose everything she had worked for. She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. With every step she made toward the door, she had come this far. She couldn't turn back now, not when everything was on the line. "I'm not here to play your game," she said, her voice steady, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm here to change the rules." With that, she walked out of the room and into a future that was uncertain, but one she was determined to shape herself. The calm before the storm. The city outside was bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun, but inside her office, the world felt colder. She sat at her desk, staring at the pile of papers that had become her reality. Each document, each name, each contract felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She wasn't just responsible for an airline anymore. She was responsible for something far bigger, far darker than she could have imagined. The game was no longer about business deals or corporate profits. It was about survival, power, and control. She had no illusions about what this was anymore. The people she had met in that cold, sterile conference room were not allies. They were wolves in sheep's clothing, each one waiting for the moment when she faltered, when she made a wrong move. The man in the suit, Mr. Gray, the cold, calculating board, they all had their agendas, their hidden motives, and she was the one caught in the middle, expected to make decisions that would either elevate her to untold power or bury her beneath a pile of lies and betrayal. But there was something else now, something burning inside her, something that had been ignited when Mr. Gray had handed her that small key, when he had told her that she was the one who could fix this. She couldn't explain it, but it was there, an undeniable force pushing her forward, a voice that told her that she wasn't powerless. She was stronger than they thought, stronger than they realized, and she was about to show them just how far she was willing to go to take back control. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She reached for it, glancing at the screen. The message was simple: meeting in 30 minutes. Boardroom. The board, the very people who had handed her this impossible responsibility, who had thrust her into a world where nothing made sense and everything was at stake. They wanted to see her again. But why? What did they expect from her now? She didn't have time to answer that question. She had to be ready, ready to face them, ready to take the next step, no matter how dangerous it might be. She stood up from the desk, straightened her jacket, and made her way to the door. The hallway outside was quiet, eerily so, as if the building itself was holding its breath. She walked past several closed doors, her footsteps echoing off the polished marble floor, until she reached the large double doors that led into the boardroom. She paused for a moment, her hand resting on the handle. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was just as cold and sterile as before. The long table stretched before her, and the same faces were seated around it. They didn't look up when she entered. Instead, they sat there, their eyes fixed on the papers in front of them, as if they were waiting for her to prove herself, to show them that she belonged. She took her seat at the head of the table, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. This was it. There was no going back now. She was no longer just a passenger on a plane, kicked off without explanation. She was no longer a woman lost in a world she didn't understand. She was in control now, and she was going to make them see it. The silence stretched on for a few moments before the man from the suit, the one who had greeted her when she first arrived, finally spoke. "You've had time to consider your position," he said, his voice low and cold. "What will you do with it?" She looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes, one by one. They were waiting for her to make her move, to show them that she had what it took to lead, to fight back against the system that had been built around them. But she wasn't interested in playing their game, not anymore. "I'm not here to take orders," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here to take control." A murmur rippled around the table, but she didn't care. She could feel the tension building in the room, a storm just waiting to break. She was tired of being controlled, tired of being manipulated. "You think you can change everything," the woman across from her said, her tone laced with disdain. "But you can't. You have no idea what you're up against. The system is already in place. You're just a pawn, no different from the rest of us." Her words were meant to cut, but they didn't reach her. She had heard it all before, the doubts, the skepticism, the underestimation. They didn't know her. They didn't know what she was capable of. "I'm not a pawn," she replied, leaning forward slightly, "and I'm not here to follow anyone's rules. I'm here to rewrite them." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Then, the man from the suit spoke again, his voice colder than before. "You think you're in control now," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But you're not. You're not ready for what's coming. You don't understand the people we're dealing with. The players in this game don't care about you. They only care about power." She knew that. She understood it better than anyone. But what he didn't understand was that power was no longer what she wanted. She wanted something else, something more. "I'm not interested in power for the sake of power," she said, her voice firm. "I'm interested in making things right. And if that means tearing everything down and building something new from the ground up, then that's what I'll do." There was another long pause, and for a moment, it seemed like no one knew how to respond. The tension in the room was thick, enough to cut with a knife. She could feel their eyes on her, their doubt, their uncertainty, but she didn't care. She wasn't here to gain their approval. She was here to prove that she could do this, that she could handle whatever they threw at her. "You're playing a dangerous game," the woman said again, her voice almost a whisper. "And you won't win." But she was already thinking ahead, already planning the next step. She wasn't afraid of them. She wasn't afraid of the dangers ahead. She had a goal now, a purpose. She had something to fight for. And nothing, no one, was going to stand in her way. "Maybe I'll lose," she said quietly, "but I'll never stop fighting. Not until I make things right." The silence that followed felt like a victory. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was enough. She knew that, from this moment on, things were going to change. She was no longer a victim of the system. She was going to be the one who changed it. The man in the suit finally stood up, his eyes still on her. "We'll see how long that resolve lasts," he said, his voice low. "But just know that the moment you make a mistake, it will all come crashing down." She stood up as well, facing him without flinching. "I'm ready," she said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to win." The room was silent as she walked out, the weight of the world still pressing down on her shoulders. But now, it felt lighter. Now, it felt like she was ready. Ready to take on whatever came next. Ready to face the storm head-on. And whatever it was, she was no longer afraid. The final choice. The clock ticked loudly in her office, each passing second reminding her that time was running out. She hadn't slept in days, and yet, her mind refused to shut down. Every decision, every move she made was weighing on her. The board was watching. The people they had warned her about were waiting. And every step she took was leading her closer to a choice, one that would define everything. The world outside her office seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but she knew better. Beneath the surface, everything was boiling, and it was only a matter of time before the storm broke. The door to her office creaked open, and she looked up to see Mr. Gray standing in the doorway, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the danger that surrounded her. He had been with her since the beginning, guiding her, showing her the ropes, but even he wasn't immune to the power struggles that raged just beyond her reach. "You're ready," he said, his voice low but steady. "They're all waiting for you. The board, the decision. It's time." She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. She knew what this meeting would mean. It would be the final test, the point of no return. Once she walked into that room, there would be no going back. She would either stand her ground and take control, or she would lose everything. "I've been ready for a long time," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "It's just a matter of making the right choice." Mr. Gray stepped aside, allowing her to pass. As she walked through the halls of the building, she couldn't help but notice how quiet everything was. The employees who worked here every day, the ones who had no idea what was happening in the shadows, None of them knew that their future was about to change. None of them knew that the decisions she was about to make would affect them in ways they couldn't even begin to comprehend. She reached the conference room and paused before opening the door. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to steady her thoughts. Then, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The board was already seated at the long, polished table. Their faces were a mixture of expectancy and calculation, each one sizing her up, waiting for her to make the first move. She could feel their eyes on her as she took her seat at the head of the table. They were all waiting for her to make a mistake, to show weakness, to falter. But she wouldn't. "You've had time to think," the man in the suit said, his voice smooth and almost patronizing. "What's your decision? Are you ready to take the reins of this company, or are you going to let us handle things for you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and she knew it wasn't just about the airline anymore. It was about power. It was about control. It was about showing them that she could stand up to them, that she wasn't afraid to make the hard decisions, even if it meant sacrificing her own peace of mind. "I'm ready," she said, her voice unwavering. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for the people who built this company, for the ones who trust us. I'm here to make things right, not just for you or for me, but for everyone who's been affected by what's happened in the past." The board members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable, but she could see it in their eyes.